stop scrolling. Because the TV brand sitting in your living room right now might be charging you for its name more than its performance. Not because televisions in 2026 are bad. They're not. In fact, this is the greatest time in television history to buy a new TV. Never before have buyers had access to this much technology at these prices. Mini LED that once belonged exclusively to flagship televisions now sits comfortably under $1,000. Gaming features that cost premium money just a few years ago are now everywhere. Picture quality that would have looked impossible 5 years ago has quietly become affordable. The problem isn't finding a good television anymore. The problem is finding the right brand. Because in 2026, some companies are building extraordinary televisions and charging exactly what they're worth. Others are charging extraordinary prices for televisions that stopped being extraordinary years ago. And then there are brands surviving entirely on yesterday's reputation. The buyer who doesn't understand the difference walks into a store, sees a familiar logo, hears the word premium 3 times from a salesperson, and walks out believing they made the smartest purchase possible. Far too often, they didn't. Today, that stops. Because I'm ranking the 10 biggest TV brands of 2026 from absolute worst to absolute best. The brands worth avoiding, the brands worth considering, and the one company that deserves the #1 position this year. No sponsorships, no brand loyalty, no marketing nonsense, just the truth about who deserves your money in 2026 and who doesn't. Number 10. Vizio, the king that forgot why it wore the crown. There was a time when recommending Vizio required absolutely no explanation. Want better picture quality without spending premium money? Buy Vizio. Want features that competitors reserved exclusively for expensive televisions? Buy Vizio. Want incredible value? Buy Vizio. For years, that recommendation made perfect sense. Then something happened that Vizio wasn't prepared for. Everybody else got better. While TCL reinvented value. While Hisense aggressively chased flagship performance. While Samsung refined its premium lineup and LG continued dominating OLED conversations. Vizio stood still, and in the television industry, standing still is simply another way of moving backwards. Here's what makes this ranking particularly disappointing. Vizio televisions aren't terrible. That's almost what makes them harder to recommend. Because terrible products are easy to identify. It's average products pretending to be exceptional that become difficult conversations. Specifications continue looking respectable on paper. Brightness numbers remain competitive. Marketing departments continue doing what marketing departments do best. Then, real life happens. Menus hesitate before responding. Software updates occasionally create more questions than answers. Picture performance struggles against competitors asking for similar money. And suddenly, buyers realize they're paying yesterday's value prices for yesterday's value proposition. The most unfortunate thing about modern Vizio televisions isn't what they're missing. It's what their competition offers instead. Number 9. Sharp, a legendary name searching for its future. If you've been buying televisions for more than 15 years, there's a very good chance you've owned a Sharp television at some point in your life. And chances are, you probably loved it. There was a time when Sharp represented innovation, premium engineering, reliability, performance buyers could proudly recommend without hesitation. Today, something has quietly changed. Ask 10 people shopping for televisions in 2026 whether Sharp still builds televisions, and several of them genuinely won't know the answer. That should never happen to legendary brands. Because great companies don't simply build products. They build relevance, and relevance is exactly where Sharp continues struggling. The difficult thing about discussing modern Sharp televisions is finding something particularly exciting to say about them. They're respectable. That's the word you'll continue hearing throughout almost every professional review. Respectable brightness, respectable picture quality, respectable reliability, respectable value. The problem is respectable stopped winning television comparisons years ago. Today, respectable is competing against mini LED technology, 144 Hz gaming performance, Dolby Vision, extraordinary brightness numbers, and flagship experiences quietly becoming affordable. Television brands aren't competing against what existed 5 years ago anymore. They're competing against what exists right now. And right now, respectable isn't enough. Sharp televisions aren't bad products, they're simply forgettable ones. And becoming forgettable might actually be worse. Number 8. Toshiba. Affordable doesn't automatically mean exceptional. There is something fascinating about Toshiba's story. Because unlike several brands on this list, Toshiba doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It isn't chasing flagship conversations. It isn't claiming to build the greatest gaming televisions on planet Earth. And it certainly isn't attempting to compete with premium OLED televisions costing thousands of dollars. Toshiba understands exactly where it belongs in today's market. And honestly, there's something admirable about that. Its televisions are simple, approachable, affordable, easy to recommend for buyers walking into the television market for the very first time. Need a television for your bedroom? Toshiba makes sense. Need something reliable for everyday Netflix, YouTube, and casual viewing? Toshiba makes sense. Need something for your parents that simply works without becoming unnecessarily complicated? Once again, Toshiba makes sense. And that's exactly where the conversation becomes difficult. Because making sense and being exceptional are two entirely different things. The problem Toshiba continues facing in 2026 isn't necessarily Toshiba itself. It's everybody else. Television technology is improving faster than most buyers realize. Features that cost premium money just a few years ago have quietly become affordable. Mini LED technology isn't expensive anymore. Gaming performance isn't reserved exclusively for flagship televisions anymore. High brightness numbers aren't premium experiences anymore. Meanwhile, Toshiba continues building televisions that feel perfectly comfortable being good enough. And good enough becomes considerably less impressive when extraordinary experiences cost only slightly more money. That's a difficult conversation to win. Number 7. Philips. The hidden masterpiece nobody talks about enough. If you've never experienced a premium Philips television, you're missing something genuinely unique. Because Philips isn't trying to make televisions look like everyone else's televisions, it's trying to make movies feel different altogether. And that's exactly what makes this brand so fascinating. There are very few moments in consumer electronics where buyers immediately stop and ask what they're looking at. Philips Ambilight technology creates one of those moments. Watching a dark thriller suddenly feels more immersive. Science fiction movies become larger than the screen itself. Colors extend beyond the television and quietly transform your entire room into part of the experience. It's difficult to explain until you've experienced it yourself. And that's exactly why buyers who love Philips televisions become remarkably loyal to the brand. But here's where things become complicated. Great products become difficult recommendations when consistency becomes unpredictable. Depending upon where you live, Philips televisions can feel like entirely different conversations. Availability changes, software experiences change, model lineups change, and suddenly recommending Philips universally becomes substantially more difficult than recommending brands like Samsung, Sony, or LG. Because consistency builds trust. Television buyers shouldn't need to research which country received which version of a particular model before making their purchasing decisions. The very best brands make recommendations easy. Philips occasionally makes them complicated, and that's unfortunate because picture quality remains genuinely impressive throughout much of its premium lineup. Color reproduction continues impressing professional reviewers year after year. Motion handling remains excellent, and movie performance deserves considerably more appreciation than it currently receives. Philips deserves substantially more attention than it gets. It simply doesn't deserve a higher ranking. Here's something most buyers don't realize. Great television brands aren't necessarily the ones building extraordinary products occasionally. They're the ones building extraordinary products consistently. And consistency remains the difference between being exceptional and becoming legendary. Philips has already mastered one half of that equation. Number 6. Panasonic. The filmmaker's favorite hiding in plain sight. There are television brands obsessed with brightness numbers. Others chase gaming performance. Some compete exclusively on value. Panasonic quietly asks an entirely different question. What did the filmmaker actually intend you to see? And remarkably few companies answer that question better. Professional color accuracy remains among the very best in the industry. Motion handling feels beautifully natural. Movie performance continues impressing enthusiasts who understand exactly what Panasonic is attempting to accomplish. There's something wonderfully old-fashioned about Panasonic's philosophy, while everyone else races toward increasingly louder specifications. Panasonic quietly perfects the details most buyers never consciously notice, until they do. Because watching exceptional content on an exceptional Panasonic television doesn't feel artificial or exaggerated. It simply feels correct, and that's considerably more difficult to achieve than most buyers realize. The problem is, correctness doesn't always create excitement. Brightness sells televisions. Gaming specifications sell televisions. Marketing departments understand that extraordinarily well. Accurate color reproduction rarely creates crowds inside retail stores. And that's where Panasonic continues struggling. Because most television buyers aren't professional colorists building dedicated home theaters. They're families watching Netflix on Sunday afternoons. They're sports fans. They're gamers. They're buyers wanting their next television to immediately make them say one thing. Wow, Panasonic isn't always interested in creating wow moments, it's interested in creating accurate moments. There's tremendous beauty in that philosophy. There's also tremendous commercial risk because television buyers often don't realize how much they'll appreciate accuracy until years after they've purchased their television. And by then, purchasing decisions have already been made. Here's what makes Panasonic extraordinary. It knows exactly who it is. And in an industry increasingly chasing everyone simultaneously, there's something incredibly respectable about that. Panasonic doesn't need to become Samsung. It doesn't need to become ELG. And it certainly doesn't need to become TCL or Hisense. It simply needs to remain Panasonic. Number 5. Hisense, the company that embarrassed premium television brands. 5 years ago, recommending Hisense required an explanation. Today, not recommending it requires one instead. No television company has reinvented itself more dramatically than Hisense over the last decade. There was a time when buyers associated this brand with one thing above everything else: compromise. Affordable prices usually came attached with difficult conversations. Software concerns. Build quality concerns. Picture quality that looked considerably better on paper than it did inside your living room. And honestly, those concerns weren't entirely unfair. The old Hisense earned much of that criticism. The problem is, buyers are still judging today's Hisense using yesterday's reputation. And that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make in 2026, because this isn't the same company anymore. Something remarkable happened over the last several years. While premium brands continued asking buyers to spend more money every generation, Hisense quietly asked a completely different question. What if buyers didn't have to? What if extraordinary picture quality didn't cost $1,500? What if mini LED technology became affordable? What if flagship specifications quietly became mainstream? And then Hisense did something even more impressive. It delivered on those promises. Televisions that should cost substantially more money simply don't anymore. Brightness numbers continue competing against premium competitors asking for hundreds of dollars more. Gaming performance finale feels mature and exceptionally refined. Google TV remains one of the easiest platforms anywhere in the industry to recommend without hesitation. Most importantly, Hisense understands something many television manufacturers continue forgetting. Buyers don't purchase televisions for laboratories, they purchase them for living rooms. Nobody cares whether engineering a feature was difficult. They care whether movie night feels extraordinary. And increasingly, Hisense delivers exactly that. Perhaps my favorite thing about modern Hisense televisions isn't what they do exceptionally well, it's what they represent. Because competition makes every buyer win. The reason flagship technologies become affordable isn't because billion-dollar corporations suddenly become generous. It's because somebody forces them to become competitive. Hisense forced that conversation, and the entire industry became better because of it. Does Hisense outperform Sony's processing performance? No. Does it dominate old conversations like LG? No, is it as universally RefNet as Samsung? Not quite. It doesn't need to be. Number 4. TCL, the company that made premium feel affordable. There are television companies that follow industry trends. Then there are companies that quietly force the entire industry to change direction. TCL belongs firmly in the second category, and perhaps that's what makes its story so extraordinary. Because TCL didn't become relevant by attempting to become Samsung. It didn't attempt becoming Sony. And it certainly didn't attempt becoming LG. Instead, TCL asked one remarkably simple question. Why should buyers continue paying premium prices for premium experiences? And then it spent years answering that question. Successfully, think about where the television market stood just a few years ago. Mini LED technology belonged almost exclusively to flagship products. Gaming televisions demanded premium budgets. Brightness performance capable of handling difficult lighting situations remained expensive. Then TCL arrived and quietly changed buyer expectations forever. Suddenly, televisions costing $900 began competing with televisions costing nearly twice as much. And suddenly, premium brands found themselves fighting conversations they never expected to have. Because value is remarkably disruptive when executed correctly. The QM series alone fundamentally changed what buyers should expect from mid-range televisions. Features that once sounded impossible at these prices quietly became normal. And honestly, that's TCL's greatest achievement. It normalized extraordinary value. Here's something most buyers don't fully appreciate. Television companies don't simply compete with each other. They compete against buyer expectations. Every time TCL releases another aggressively priced television performing considerably above its price category, it quietly changes what consumers believe affordable televisions should look like. And when consumer expectations change, entire industries are forced to evolve alongside them. That's influence. Brightness performance remains exceptional. Gaming experiences continue impressing enthusiasts worldwide. Google TV implementation remains among the very best anywhere in the market today. Most importantly, TCL understands balance remarkably well. You shouldn't need to sacrifice gaming performance for movie performance. You shouldn't need to sacrifice brightness for value. Increasingly, buyers simply don't have to anymore. Who is it for? Sports fans, gamers, families, and buyers refusing to compromise without paying premium prices. Who should skip it? Number 3. Sony, the company that taught the industry refinement matters. There is something extraordinarily difficult to explain about exceptional Sony televisions. Specifications rarely tell the entire story. Professional reviews certainly help, and yet somehow neither fully explains what makes Sony different. Because watching an exceptional Sony television feels different in ways buyers don't immediately understand until they're sitting directly in front of one. Motion feels natural. Colors feel deliberate. Film grain looks exactly the way filmmakers intended. Nothing feels exaggerated. Nothing feels artificial. Everything simply feels correct. And remarkably, few companies understand how difficult that experience actually is to create. While competitors continue competing for increasingly impressive specification sheets, Sony quietly asks an entirely different question. How does this actually look? Because televisions aren't specification charts hanging inside electronics stores. They're experiences. They're Sunday afternoon football games shared with family members. They're movie nights lasting considerably longer than originally planned because nobody wants to stop watching. They're moments buyers continue remembering years after making their purchasing decisions. Sony understands that distinction better than almost anyone. And perhaps that's precisely why filmmakers continue trusting Sony technologies throughout professional environments worldwide. The most fascinating thing about Sony isn't necessarily how beautiful its televisions look. It's how beautifully restrained they remain. Sony doesn't need overwhelming brightness numbers to create extraordinary experiences. It doesn't need aggressively marketed gaming terminology printed across retail packaging. It simply needs exceptional engineering. And year after year, that's exactly what buyers receive. The reason Sony isn't sitting at number 1 has absolutely nothing to do with quality. It's price. Number 2. LG. the OLED empire that changed television forever. There are moments throughout technology history when one company creates something so extraordinary that competitors spend years trying to catch it. LG, the OLED story, is one of those moments. Because before OLED became synonymous with premium home entertainment, before perfect blacks became something buyers actively searched for, and before movie enthusiasts began redesigning their living rooms around their televisions, there was LG quietly building the future. And remarkably enough, they're still doing exactly that today. There's something magical about experiencing a premium LG OLED television for the very first time. The lights go off. Your movie begins. And suddenly, you stop looking at a television altogether. The black bars surrounding your favorite films don't look black anymore. They simply disappear. Stars hanging inside the night sky don't feel like pixels feeding against their backlight. They feel suspended in darkness, exactly the way filmmakers intended. And for just a moment, you completely forget technology exists between you and what you're watching. That's old at its very best. And nobody understands that experience better than LG. Of course, LG isn't simply building extraordinary movie televisions. Gaming enthusiasts have spent years falling in love with what this company continues delivering generation after generation. Beautifully refined gaming experiences, remarkably low input lag, features that genuinely improve how games feel rather than simply improving marketing material printed across retail packaging. There is a reason premium gaming conversations almost always find themselves returning to LG, because excellence eventually becomes expectation. And LG has spent years making excellence feel normal. Its software remains refined. Its industrial design continues impressing buyers worldwide. Its commitment to innovation remains impossible to ignore. Quite simply, LG televisions feel expensive because they deserve to. So why isn't LG sitting comfortably at number one? Because greatness and completeness aren't always the same thing. LG dominates OLED conversations magnificently. Samsung dominates television conversations. That distinction matters considerably more than many buyers realize. Number 1. Samsung, the king that mastered balance. This ranking would have been considerably easier if building the world's greatest television required mastering only one thing. It doesn't, because televisions aren't purchased inside laboratories. They're purchased inside living rooms. Families don't sit around dinner tables debating color calibration charts. Sports fans don't spend their weekends discussing processing algorithms. Gamers don't exclusively care about perfect black levels. People simply want extraordinary televisions. Samsung understands that remarkably well, and perhaps that's why it continues fending itself at the very top of conversations throughout the entire industry. Because Samsung isn't attempting to build televisions for one type of buyer. It's building televisions for virtually every type of buyer imaginable. Want extraordinary brightness performance? Samsung has an answer. Want premium flagship experiences? Samsung has an answer. Want beautiful industrial design that transforms your television into part of your home's aesthetic rather than simply another electronic device? Once again, Samsung has an answer. And perhaps most impressively, Samsung delivers those answers consistently, year after year. That's considerably more difficult than many buyers realize. Building one extraordinary television is difficult enough. Building extraordinary television lineups generation after generation is something else entirely. And Samsung has spent years quietly mastering exactly that. Final verdict: the TV market has never been more competitive, with amazing options available at every budget. But great marketing doesn't always mean great performance. The best TV is the one that delivers the experience you'll enjoy for years to come. Choose wisely and let performance, not the logo, guide your decision. If this video helped, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone looking for their next TV. See you in the next one.